fun, man.
Few movies have branded an entire decade the way Top Gun did. When it hit theaters in the summer of 1986, director Tony Scott wasn't just making an action film about fighter pilots. He was building a new kind of cinematic experience, one drenched in sunlight, jet exhaust, and adrenaline. Tom Cruise's Pete Maverick Mitchell became an instant American icon, reckless, magnetic, and impossible to look away from. Anthony Edwards gave us Goose, the loyal wingman whose fate still stings decades later. Kelly McGillis brought grounded intelligence to Charlie, the civilian instructor who saw the man underneath the ego. Val Kilmer, as Iceman, said more with a clenched jaw than most actors manage in a monologue. And Tom Skerritt's Viper gave the whole story its sense of earned authority. Behind the camera, producers Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer turned a $15 million production into a $350 million global phenomenon, one that reshaped how action movies looked, sounded, and sold sunglasses. The soundtrack roared out of car radios for years. The bomber jackets, the aviators, the beach volleyball, all of it became shorthand for 1980s cool. But the story of how Top Gun actually got made is stranger, riskier, and more fragile than most fans realize. A tragic real-world accident shadows one of its most famous sequences. A love story that feels central to the film almost didn't exist. And the villain's jet wasn't a villain's jet at all. It was borrowed from the U.S. Navy's own training playbook. Buckle up, because these are 15 facts about Top Gun that even longtime fans might not know. Top Gun didn't begin in a writer's room. It began on a newsstand. In May of 1983, journalist Ehud Yoni published a feature in California magazine simply titled Top Guns. The piece followed real Navy aviators through the grueling 5-week fighter weapons training course at Naval Air Station Miramar, just north of San Diego, the actual fighter town, USA, that inspired the film's setting. Yoni's reporting captured something Hollywood rarely got right: the exhausting rivalry, the exacting skill, and a strange mixture of fear and euphoria that came with flying an F-14 Tomcat to its absolute limits. Photographs by Charles Heatley accompanied the story, showing jets banking hard against desert light and open ocean. Images so cinematic that producers Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer optioned the film rights within 2 months of publication. Turning the article into an actual movie proved far harder than acquiring it. Several screenwriters passed on the project, and at least 2 well-known directors reportedly declined to take it on, unconvinced that a story built around radio call signs and flight procedure could carry a feature film. Eventually, writers Jim Cash and Jack Epps Jr. took a swing at it. Epps didn't just read about Miramar. He went there. He sat in on classes, spoke with instructors and students, and even flew in the back seat of a fighter jet to understand, physically, what a high G turn does to a human body. Their first draft still wasn't what the producers wanted, and it went through significant revision before the film we know took shape. Decades later, the article's legacy resurfaced in an unexpected way. In 2022, Yonui's widow and son filed a lawsuit against Paramount over Top Gun. Maverick, arguing that rights to the original article had reverted to them and that the sequel infringed on it. Paramount successfully argued that Maverick was built on the original 1986 film, not the magazine piece, and the claim was ultimately rejected. Still, it's a reminder that everything about Top Gun, the call signs, the culture, the mythology, traces back to a single magazine assignment about real pilots. Top Gun's aerial sequences look real because, for the most part, they are. In the mid-1980s, the F-14 Tomcat was the most advanced fighter in the Navy's arsenal, and each aircraft represented an enormous taxpayer investment. Figures commonly cited at close to $38 million per jet. Paramount couldn't simply borrow them for free. The studio negotiated paid access with the Department of Defense, reportedly paying several $1,000s per flight hour per aircraft to have real Tomcats perform for the cameras. Add in fuel, aircrew time, use of Miramar's facilities, and time aboard active aircraft carriers, and the studio's total military-related expenses are widely reported to have run past $1 million, a substantial slice of a $15 million production budget. It was, in hindsight, a bargain. No visual effects technology of the era could have convincingly replicated real catapult launches, live-fire afterburners, and formation flying above open ocean. Filming aboard a real aircraft carrier produced its own unplanned moments of movie magic. During production aboard the USS Enterprise, Tony Scott became fixated on the deck at sunset when a warm golden light briefly bathed the entire flight deck. When the carrier changed heading and the light disappeared, Scott reportedly asked whether the ship could adjust course to recapture the glow, a request that came with a real-world price tag in fuel and logistics, said to run into the tens of thousands of dollars. According to accounts from the production, Scott paid for it out of his own pocket rather than let the shot slip away. It's a small anecdote, but a telling one. For a director this obsessed with light and texture, no dollar amount was too high for a few perfect minutes of footage. Nothing sells Top Gun's sense of danger like its cockpit close-ups. The strained necks, the darting eyes, the sweat catching the light as jets bank hard against an enemy. Many viewers assumed cameras were simply mounted inside real F-14 cockpits mid-flight. In truth, only a portion of that footage came from the air, and even then, the problem was never the visuals, it was the sound. Jet engines and wind noise overwhelmed any usable dialogue, even with specialized recording equipment. The production solution was to separate the sensation of flying from the actual performance of dialogue. Crews built a highly detailed, full-scale F-14 cockpit mock-up mounted on a hydraulic gimbal inside a hangar near Burbank Airport. Rear-projected footage of sky and horizon played behind the actors while the rig tilted and shook to mimic banking, diving, and rapid maneuvering. Off-camera crew members sprayed the actors with water to simulate sweat, and flashing lights were used to suggest shifting sunlight and combat conditions. In these controlled sequences, the cast wasn't experiencing real G-forces. They were recreating through memory and performance sensations they had genuinely felt during earlier flights the Navy did allow them to take. Real aerial footage still played a major role. Exterior dives, climbs, and formation passes were captured from chase planes and a camera-equipped jet, flown by real Navy pilots. One of those pilots later became a NASA astronaut, and is reported to have flown some of the film's most memorable low-altitude passes near the Miramar Control Tower. The final film blends these elements so tightly, real exteriors, simulated interiors, that most audiences never notice the seam. Sun-drenched, oiled, and set to a Kenny Loggins track, the beach volleyball scene has become one of the most recognizable images from Top Gun, and it very nearly didn't survive the editing process. Narratively, the scene does almost nothing. No missions are planned. No orders are given. It exists purely to show the pilots as young men with egos and rivalries outside of the cockpit. Tony Scott, who came from a background in high-end commercial advertising, reportedly shot the sequence like a perfume ad. Bodies in motion, light catching sweat and skin, rhythm dictated entirely by music rather than dialogue. Crews are said to have time to shoot around the narrow golden hour windows at sunrise and sunset, with actors periodically sprayed with water and given a light sheen of oil between takes to keep the visuals consistent. When studio executives first reviewed the footage, the reaction was reportedly lukewarm at best. It looked to some like an expensive detour at a point in the film crying out for more jets and more training sequences. Scott is said to have pushed back, insisting the scene served an emotional purpose the dogfights couldn't, establishing physical rivalry and camaraderie between Maverick and Iceman before either character ever climbs into a cockpit together. Decades of parody, homage, and pop culture callbacks later, the instinct has aged remarkably well. A scene once viewed internally as filler became one of the most quoted and referenced sequences of the entire film. It's hard to imagine now, but by the mid-1980s, Ray-Ban's classic aviator sunglasses had fallen out of fashion, drifting toward retired military dad territory rather than anything stylish. Sales figures for the aviator line had reportedly slipped to a fraction of the brand's earlier peak. Then Tom Cruise put on a pair of gold-rimmed aviators, and the frames became a cultural reset button. Maverick's sunglasses worked because they carried real authenticity, They were the same style genuinely issued to military aviators, combined with the character's reckless charisma. They made crews look simultaneously untouchable and attainable. Anyone could walk into a store and buy the glasses, even if they'd never come close to flying an actual fighter jet. Reports from the period suggest aviator sales climbed sharply in the months following the film's release, with some accounts citing an increase in the range of 30 to 40% within the following year. The effect didn't fade with the decade. Ray-Ban's aviator line remained a reliable seller through the late 80s and beyond, and when Top Gun: Maverick reignited interest in the franchise in 2022, aviator sales spiked once again as a new generation discovered the same frames. A piece of practical military equipment, reframed by a single movie character, became one of the most enduring style statements in modern cinema. Val Kilmer did not want to be in Top Gun. By his own later account, he wasn't drawn to the script and was uneasy with what he saw as the film's celebration of military bravado. The problem was that Kilmer was under an existing multi-picture contract with Paramount, and when the studio insisted he audition for the role of Iceman, he had little room to refuse outright. So he found a subtler way to resist. He reportedly showed up to the audition in oversized shorts and delivered his lines with deliberately flat, low-energy readings, hoping to convince the producers he simply wasn't right for the part. It didn't work. Kilmer was cast as Iceman, and once on set, he seems to have redirected his ambivalence into the character itself. He kept a deliberate distance from Tom Cruise during filming, which fed naturally into the rivalry the script called for, and the two actors' contrasting temperaments. Cruise's intensity versus Kilmer's cool detachment gave their scenes an authentic edge that would have been hard to script. With relatively little written material to work from beyond elite rival pilot, Kilmer is said to have built his own backstory for Iceman: a demanding upbringing, obsessive self-discipline, and a need for perfection that bordered on compulsive. Small physical choices, a clenched jaw, an unblinking stare, became the character's signature, memorable enough that Iceman is now often cited as one of the film's most quietly compelling performances. By the time filming wrapped, Kilmer's feelings about the project had reportedly shifted considerably, and years later, when a sequel entered development, he was said to have actively pushed to be part of it rather than waiting to be asked. Some of Top Gun's most enduring moments have nothing to do with aircraft at all. Two-bar sequences, grounded, low-tech, and almost entirely dialogue-driven, carry a surprising amount of the film's emotional weight. In the first, Maverick spots Charlie across a crowded officers' club and, in a moment of pure impulsiveness, launches into an off-key rendition of "You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin'." One by one, his fellow pilots join in, turning an awkward solo into a chaotic group performance that captures the character's reckless charm in a way no cockpit scene could. Later, at a real San Diego restaurant used as a filming location, Goose takes over the piano for a rowdy rendition of "Great Balls of Fire," with the rest of the cast singing along and Charlie looking on. These scenes exist to do something the aerial sequences structurally can't: humanize the pilots as friends, rivals, and ordinary young men with routines and relationships, rather than just call signs on a blackboard. That grounding matters enormously once tragedy strikes later in the story. The earlier warmth makes the loss land harder. Both filming locations have reportedly become informal pilgrimage sites for fans in the years since, outlasting almost every other physical remnant of the production. Top Gun's climactic dogfight pits American F-14s against sleek, black-painted MiG-28s bearing red stars on their tails. Aviation enthusiasts notice something odd almost immediately. No such aircraft has ever existed. The MiG-28 was pure invention, built from very real hardware. Specifically, Northrop F-5 Tiger II jets, American-made aircraft the Navy already used at Miramar to simulate enemy fighters during actual training exercises. For the film, these jets were repainted in a menacing black and red scheme and given a fictional designation. The choice of 28 wasn't random. Real Soviet-era MiG fighters were almost always given odd-numbered designations: the MiG-15, MiG-21, MiG-23, MiG-29, so an even-numbered MiG-28 functioned as a quiet signal to inform viewers that this particular jet didn't exist in reality. The film goes even further in its vagueness. No enemy nation is ever named, no flag appears, and the antagonists are identified only by the red star associated broadly with the Cold War. That ambiguity wasn't laziness. It kept the story from being anchored to one specific real-world conflict, turning the dogfights into abstract contests of skill rather than a pointed political statement. There's a nice irony buried in all of this. The most obviously fictional aircraft in the entire film was, in practice, built from a genuine and well-established military training technique. If one single image defines Top Gun visually, it's Maverick's F-14 flipping upside down directly above an enemy MiG, canopy nearly touching canopy, as he and Goose snap a photo and flip off the opposing pilot. For real naval aviators, the shot is pure fantasy from a physics standpoint. The F-14's twin-tail fins rise well above the fuselage, meaning any aircraft attempting that maneuver in reality would risk direct collision with whatever sat beneath it. The turbulent air generated by two jets in such tight, opposing proximity would also be extremely dangerous. Real formation flying deliberately staggers aircraft to avoid exactly that kind of wake interference. There's a practical limitation, too. Fighter jets can sustain inverted flight only briefly before fuel feed issues risk starving the engine, making an extended upside-down hover over another aircraft, long enough to react, maneuver, and photograph someone, essentially impossible to sustain safely. The production achieved the illusion through careful practical effects rather than the maneuver itself. F-5 standing in for the enemy MiGs flew in tight formation beside a camera-equipped jet, with the pilots reacting on cue as though something startling loomed above them. The inverted Tomcat was composited into the shot afterward, making it one of relatively few true visual effects moments in an otherwise heavily practical aerial film. Tony Scott wasn't attempting technical accuracy. He was chasing a feeling, audacity, precision, and irreverence, distilled into a single unforgettable image. It worked so well that for many viewers, this shot alone is what they remember most about the entire movie. When Maverick races his motorcycle alongside a jet barreling down the runway, he isn't just riding a prop bike for the camera. He's on one of the most advanced production motorcycles available anywhere in the world at the time. The bike is a Kawasaki Jeep Easy 900R, known widely by its Ninja branding, released in 1984 as the first mass-produced motorcycle to use a liquid-cooled 16-valve inline-4 engine. With a top speed reported around 150 miles per hour, it was at the time the fastest production motorcycle a civilian could legally buy, quite literally the closest thing to fighter jet performance available on two wheels. What makes the sequence more remarkable is that Tom Cruise reportedly had never ridden a motorcycle before signing on to Top Gun. To prepare, he visited a motorcycle dealership in Southern California, where staff walked him through the basics in a parking lot. Soon after, he was filming high-speed runway sequences without a helmet, leaning through turns just feet away from taxiing jets, a combination that reads as both thrilling and, in hindsight, fairly alarming from a safety standpoint. Kawasaki itself played an unexpectedly tense supporting role,